right, we are going to get started. Hello everyone. My name is Jane Johnston, and I work in the Community Service Learning Center as a Civic Engagement Associate. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of the CSLC, the Community Service Learning Center. Ooh, yay. Oh my gosh, that's like never happened before. Yay. Our center is located in Kirkhoff, right across the hallway from Panda Express, and we focus on connecting students with community and democratic engagement opportunities. So in addition to working with a number of community partners to give you guys opportunities tailored specifically to what you guys love to do. We also have a series of programming that we put on every semester. So in terms of democratic engagement programming, we have events like Democracy 101, like you're at tonight. We have a podcast for our center called Be the Change. We host pretty regular voter registration drives around campus, which if you guys are interested in either hosting or you have an organization that might like to host, you guys can go to our Laker link and fill out a form there to register or to host a registration drive. And we also have a group that gets together primarily during election cycles like the one we are in the middle of right now, called the Campus Democratic Engagement Coalition. So this is a group of students, faculty, and staff that really are the core of how we are able to put on all of the amazing things that we do throughout the year. So like National Voter Registration Day or on Election Day, we usually have a ton of voter vans that will take students to their polling locations. They've been instrumental in helping us actually get a polling location here on campus for November this year, and a variety of other things. So if you guys are interested in joining that, you guys can talk to me and I can get you contact information and meetings and all that kind of stuff. So in addition to all of the opportunities that we are already putting on this semester and in the future, we also have numerous opportunities for you guys to actually work in the CSLC. So unfortunately, myself, my friend Stephanie back there, and our coworker Catherine are all graduating this year. But luckily for you, that means there are open positions in the CSLC doing exactly what I'm doing now as a civic engagement associate. We also work with a couple nonprofits and national nonprofits to bring in democracy fellows who help put on our voter registration drives and coordinate that Campus Democratic Engagement Coalition that I mentioned earlier. And if any of you guys, is anyone a graduate student? Cool, so we also have a grad assistant position available if you're interested in that. How many of you guys are here for Lib 100 or 201? Awesome, so our peer mentor, Maddie, is here to answer any of your questions that you might have for class or about the topic or anything like that. So specifically for Dem 101 tonight, we are going to be talking about democracy and the American dream tonight. And this is part of a series that we're holding all semester. Our theme for Democracy 101 this semester is deconstructing the American dream. So this is just one in a number of events that we hope you guys will come back to all semester long. But to get started tonight, I want you guys to take a look on your tables. There are these conversation agreements right here. I think what would be awesome is if we can all, if I can get some volunteers and we can kind of read through these a little bit. They're just going to help us know some guidelines for conversation tonight. Sometimes these sessions, we talk about topics and issues that are somewhat sometimes divisive, and sometimes we don't really know how to properly communicate those issues with each other. So we just like to go over these to make sure that we're all on the same page when discussing any topics tonight. So does anyone want to read the first one for me? There you go, Steph. Good. Thank you. What about number 2? Okay, go ahead, Grace. All right, and number 3? Go ahead. Yeah. Great, thank you. And what about the next one? All right. And then the next one? Great. And then I'll finish this up here. Own and guide the conversation. Take responsibility for the quality of your participation and the conversation as a whole. Be proactive in getting yourself and others back on track if needed. Use an agreed upon signal like the timeout sign if you feel the agreements are not being honored. So these are just some guidelines that I just want you guys to keep in mind tonight. If there's anything that you don't know if you necessarily agree with, that comes up in the presentation or comes up in any discussions that you might be having at your tables, just keep those in mind and try to navigate those conversations with those agreements in mind. So before I hand it over to our presenter tonight, we are going to read a poem. So on your table, there's these copies of this poem by Langston Hughes called Let America Be America Again. And it's a pretty long poem. So I think what will be great if everyone is okay with this, I'm just going to hand the mic off and we can kind of pass it around the room and everyone can read a stanza. Does that sound good? I can start, but what we want to do with this poem, we're going to have this at all of our sessions this semester, and we really want to get you guys thinking about this idea of the American dream and how your perception of America might be different than another person's perception, and I think this poem captures that perfectly. So, I'll start out. Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain, seeking a home where he himself is free. America was never America to me. And if you don't feel comfortable reading out loud, you can just pass it along. That's no problem.
Let America be the dream the dreamers dreamed. Let it be that great strong land of love, where never kings connive nor tyrants scheme. Let any man be crushed by one above. It was never America to me.
Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned, with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real, and life is free. Equality is in the air we breathe. There's never been equality for me, nor freedom is this homeland of the free.
Say, who are you that mumbles in the dark, and who are you that draws your veil across the stars? I am the poor white fooled and pushed apart. I am the Negro bearing slavery's scars. I am the red man driven from the land. I am the immigrant clutching the hope I seek, and finding only the same old stupid plan of dog eating dog, of mighty crush the weak.
I am the young man full of strength and hope, tangled in that ancient endless chain of profit, power, gain, of grab the land, of grab the gold, of grab the ways of satisfying need, of work the men, of take the pay, of owning everything for one's own greed.
I am the farmer. I'm the farmer bondsman to the soil. I'm the worker's soul to the machine.
I am the Negro, servant to you all. I am the people, humble, hungry, mean. Hungry yet today despite the dream. Beaten yet today, O pioneers. I am the man who never got ahead, the poorest worker bartered through the years.
Yet I'm the one who dreamt our basic dream in the old world while still a serf of kings, who dreamt a dream so strong, so brave, so true, that even yet its mighty daring sings. In every brick and stone, in every furrow turned, that's made America the land it has become. Oh, I'm the man who sailed those early seas in search of what I meant to be my home. For I'm the one who left the dark Ireland shore, and Poland's plain, and England's grassy lea, and torn from black Africa's strand, I came to build a homeland of the free.
The free? Who said the free? Not me. Surely not me. The millions on relief today. The millions shot down when we strike. The millions who have nothing for our pay. For all the dreams we've dreamed, and all the songs we've sung, and all the hopes we've held, and all the flags we've hung. The millions who have nothing for our pay, except the dream that's almost dead today.
Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, and yet must be, the land where every man is free, the land that's mine, the poor man's, Indians, Negroes, me, who made America, whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain must bring back our mighty dream again.
Sure, call me any ugly name you choose. The steel of freedom does not stain. From those who live like leeches on the people's lives, we must take back our land again, America.
I'll finish it off. Oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be. Out of the rack and ruin of our gangster death, the rape and rot of graft and stealth and lies, we the people must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains, the endless plain, all the stretch of these great green states, and make America again.
Great. So yeah, I really love that poem. I think what Langston Hughes says in this poem about the many faces of America, and who we have been, who we are, and who we can be, is really the guiding theme of Democracy 101 this semester. And it delves into a lot of the topics and issues that we really want you guys to be critically thinking about throughout this series. So with that, I'm actually going to hand it off to our presenter and we can get started. So Matt Roberts is here with us tonight. He is going to be presenting on democracy and the American dream. And yeah, I'll just hand it right over to him and he can get us started. So thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Okay, that is working. I was going to say I moved it to my lapel, and I wanted to make sure you could. Is it too loud? Because I have a tendency to be loud anyway. But I also have a tendency to actually. Can you hear me when I go like this? Okay. I have a tendency to roam, so I have a feeling that's not a magic camera that's going to follow me. I'm going to have to try to be good and not like go too far to the ends of the earth today. So hi. Let's see. Computer wants my password. So let me say a little bit about myself. So I actually wear 2 hats here at the university. So I am a member of the faculty. I teach political science. In particular, I teach Political Science 206, which is American Constitutional Foundations, just about the weirdest class on the face of the earth. I don't know who designed it, but the idea was let's create an introduction to American government, but let's force students to, who probably don't have a lot of interest in politics or a lot of experience, to pretend that they're lawyers and learn to read opinions written by the Supreme Court. So it's still a fun class. I love it, but it's a challenge. But it puts me in regular contact with the Constitution, something that I love thinking about and writing about and talking about, as I guess I'm here tonight doing. I actually wear another hat. My day job, so to speak, at the university is that I actually work over at information technology. If you read my name tag, yeah, it doesn't say political science. I actually work and I actually help other faculty try to become a little better at being faculty, and especially when it comes to technology, how to use technology in their courses. Okay, someone's coming to the camera. Am I doing something wrong? Am I good? Okay, excellent. So, yeah, this is probably one of my favorite topics to talk about, as I'll come back to in a moment. Before I go any farther and say anything else, I want to get a sense of who's here in the room. So, are any of you political science majors? Okay, got one. Are any of you, let's see, I saw a couple hands who were here for like lib credit. What else is important? Was anybody here last week and saw the screening of the American Creed documentary? Okay, you don't just keep your hand up. I mean, you can be like the volunteer for everything, I suppose. Okay, so how many of you have been to a Democracy 101 session before? Okay, a few of you. Many of them people who I would expect to see here. I did watch a few of the videos posted from previous sessions just to get an idea of what they're like and to see if I'm covering things that have already been said. But I think I'm probably safe in terms of what we're going to talk about. I'm really honored to be given this opportunity. Thank you to Jane and to Catherine and Melissa for the invitation and for the help in putting all this together. But I'm going to be honest. I love talking about democracy, in part because I think it's a concept that most people haven't spent a lot of time thinking about in depth. But it's a huge topic, really. And the same thing with the American dream. The American dream, we obviously going to talk for a whole semester about the American dream, and we're not going to be done with it even then. So in the midst of those two huge topics, I sort of struggled to figure out what it is I should talk about and how to bring these together and talk about democracy and the American dream. So I think we've got something, and hopefully we'll be able to have some conversation at the end about some of the stuff. We're going to talk a little bit sort of background and talk some first principles. We're going to talk a little bit about the state of America as it is, and then hopefully have something meaty to chew on at the end, if we have time at the end. I don't know. Okay. So to try to prepare myself, I did actually watch, you can do it online, pbs.org, watch the American Creed documentary that was sort of the subject of last week's meeting. And a couple of things struck me. First of all, when I think about the American dream, I usually think specifically about socioeconomics, right? The idea of, whatever it is in your head, right? Whether it's for early immigrants, whether it's the land that they could till and own for themselves, whether it's sort of the common white middle class house with the white picket fence and 2.5 kids, don't ask how the half comes into play. And but really, watching the American Creed documentary made me one of the things that they said in there was that, and I don't remember who said this, but the American dream is really in part about the values that join us together. And that gave me an entrance to figure out what to talk about, because it sort of coincides with something that I talk about in most of my intro political science courses. And to get to that, I need a couple of volunteers. Can I get 4 volunteers? The room doesn't have a lot of people in it, so you might be volunteers a lot tonight, just so you know. Okay, to be a volunteer, okay, 1 volunteer. To be a volunteer, you need to have no noticeable food allergies. Okay, yeah, we're good? Okay, so I've got 1. We'll do this kind of distribution style. Okay, so I have here, and I went into the kitchen and I found a knife, so I did not like cut this with my bare hands or anything. This has not been, I didn't wear gloves or anything, but okay, so this is a candy bar. This is a standard American candy bar. I did not in advance go and get a weird one from like, World Market or something. So this is a standard candy bar that as long as you eat candy, you've probably eaten before, okay? I wasn't gonna try and stump you or anything. So I'm gonna give you a piece, and then I've got 3 more pieces. So take 1. Okay, who else wants one? This is dessert. See, pizza, and I brought the dessert. Some people are still eating. Candy? I just grab it? Yeah, go right ahead, yeah. Okay, I've got 2 more. I mean, I can save one. Okay, thank you. Who wants the last? This is actually the biggest piece. This was actually a psychological experiment to see who would take the biggest piece. Saved to the end, so I don't know. Ooh, both of you raised your hands. So see, keeping the knife has been very important because now, okay, you take 1. Still taking a smaller piece. Okay, now all of you take and eat it. Okay, and what I want you to do is as you're eating it, savor the flavors, the expensive chocolate that my $1.25 bought from the candy machine. Okay, try to identify the parts to it. Okay, roll it around in your mouth. Chew and swallow. Okay, so some foods are very distinctive based upon the ingredients that compose them, right? I did this in class once, and I actually had like 4 different candy bars, and it was just a nightmare of organization to try to remember who had what. So I kept it simple here. 1 candy bar. Does anybody recognize what it is? And that person or persons could then say what it is. Snickers, okay. How did you know it was Snickers? You just know, okay, bodily intuitive gut kind of thing about Snickers. Were there any clues in what it was composed of? Okay. Okay, so the shape and the structure said something to you. Peanuts, I mean, that probably gave it away. Whole peanuts don't show up in a lot of candy bars. I mean, some candy bars are very distinctive based upon the ingredients, right? Maybe this is like before your time because I don't think they use this jingle anymore, but Almond Joys have nuts, mounds don't. Okay, so are those even popular candy bars anymore? I don't know. Yeah, okay, Jane says yes. Jane is the authoritative source on all things related to at least candy for the moment. Okay, so Snickers, we identified it, the peanuts, the nougat, whatever the heck nougat is. I still don't understand nougat. It's some weird chemical creation from a lab somewhere. I don't know. Okay, so we identified what it was. And you know what? We could do a similar thing, and I actually do this in my classes. I ask my students to sort of think about what America is in terms of what we believe politically. What are the ideas that sort of represent American political thought? And then sort of to come up with those. I'm not going to ask you to do that right now. I'm just going to sort of give you my list. And I've got 10 ingredients. And I'm going to talk about each one of them briefly because I want to focus on a couple, not all of them. But I just want to lay all my cards on the table, right? So if we're trying to identify what the political portion of the American creed, the American dream is, I think it can come down to these 10 things. And if you think there's something I'm missing, please let me know. I've been running with this list of ingredients for a while and no one's added anything, but that doesn't mean it's perfect, okay? Okay, so the first ingredient, these are probably going to be familiar to those of you who hopefully at some point in your life have had an American government class or a civics class. So the first is the separation of powers, right? So very popular at the time that the framers wrote the Constitution were the ideas of a guy named Montesquieu who's kind of associated with the idea that, hey, you know what? Political power can be divided into 3 parts. The power to write the laws, the power to execute or enforce the laws, and then the power to judge what the law says in any particular case, right? And the argument was that those powers should be split up for protecting individuals, right? You have problems when all of those powers are put into one set of hands, like in the hands of a despotic king, for example. Okay, so separation of powers, we have that. We've got 3 branches of government. But we also have a very important concept that goes hand in hand, checks and balances. Who can give me an example of a check or balance in the American political system? Didn't know it was going to be a quiz, but no grade. Okay, one that most people could probably come up with if they've thought, right? The president is part of the legislative process. He gets to say whether someday she will get to say whether a law can actually become a law once it's voted on by Congress, okay? What else? There's another one that's relating to the president and Congress that hopefully you're encountering in the news on a daily basis. Gene? The power to impeach and possibly convict, right? Yeah, that's another connection between, there's a whole list we could come up with. There's no point in going through all of them. But the point here is to remember that these two really work together because we do have 3 separate branches of government, but the fact is the powers they have are not entirely separate. The veto makes the president part of the legislative process. So what I'm trying to be really precise, what I say is, we have 3 separate institutions, but they share powers because that was sort of the philosophy that the framers had for how to sort of prevent abuse from happening within government, right? You sort of give everybody the ability to sort of keep their eye on what everybody else is doing, right? President to Congress, Congress to president, the Supreme Court, minimally to the other branches, but okay. Federalism. This might be a little bit more of a stretch depending upon when your American government class was. Does anybody know what federalism is? This might be the one idea that the framers really came up with. I mean, most of the stuff they were throwing into the Constitution was like recycled. I mean, either going all the way back thousands of years or fairly recent in terms of ideas, but federalism kind of was their invention. So federalism, most people would say, is the idea that we have 2 levels of government. Right? We've got the state governments, and then we've got a federal government, which is above all. We also have local governments, right, and county governments. How do those fit in? Well, the secret is they don't really. They're all underneath the state government. The secret about federalism is that those 2 levels of government, state and federal, are actually fully independent from each other, and neither one can actually do anything to harm or get rid of or limit the other one. The real meaning of federalism is not actually that. The real meaning of federalism, though, is actually that the power in our political system is really held by the people. Sovereignty is an important term, right? Sovereignty is sort of where the legitimate source of political power comes from. Sovereignty belongs to the people, but they then delegate it to 2 separate levels of government. That's really what federalism is. Okay, so federalism, individual rights. Okay. Somebody, name your favorite right. Okay, we got to become a more talkative group tonight. We got to keep this fun, okay? Name your favorite right. Right to vote. Excellent. Wonderful. Okay. So individual rights, this idea that we as a system recognize that individuals somehow have these protections. And they come in flavors, right? There are protections that we have from the government. The right to free speech, for example, is really what's sometimes called a negative liberty because it stops the federal government from infringing upon us and stopping us from saying things. Big question, does it apply to Facebook? Who knows? Maybe we'll find out someday. That's a negative liberty. But the right to vote, for example, is actually a little bit different. To fully exercise the right to vote, government sometimes has to step in. So for example, if someone is trying to block you from getting to your polling place, well, government is supposed to remove those obstacles and ensure that you have the right to actually positively take advantage of that right. Okay? Individual rights. Then limited government. So limited government kind of is one that we don't think about too much, but really from the point of view of how the framers wrote the Constitution and what they were thinking, even back to the Declaration of Independence, it's really important because it shows sort of a bias that the framers had away from the state and in favor of individuals. They wanted a system that would give maximal, I don't want to say freedom because it's a squishy term, but they wanted to give maximum room to individuals to take advantage of the opportunities given to them. Insert here all the basic, really thumbnail sketches of the American dream, right? All the things that you need government to get out of the way for so that you can do them, right? Okay, so if we're thinking about government as a car, we're going to do that a couple of times tonight. These are kind of like the features, right? You know, the power windows, the moon roof. These are the things that sort of are the nice things that you're looking for in a political system. The next ones I want to talk about kind of represent more important features that really sort of power or make government possible. One is the rule of law. The framers were very clear that they were creating a system that was supposed to be ruled by law and not by people, by men. What does that mean? Any guesses? What does it mean to have a government of laws? They tell you to just wait until someone through pure guilt says something, but so I'm not going to presume that any of you spend any significant portion of your time paying attention to current events. So I'm just going to say, hey, did anybody hear a while back President Trump say something to the effect of, you know what, I could go out into the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and get away with it? Yeah, I think this was back during the campaign in 2016, actually. What do you think? Does that concept fit with our understanding of the rule of law? Yeah. And I mean, the idea of the rule of law is more complicated than people think, but the heart of it is that everybody is subject to the same laws. No one is above them. We don't have a system where there's a king or an emperor who can do whatever they want, but the laws that get passed only apply to the citizens, right? In theory, everybody is governed by the same laws, and they're supposed to be fair and equal, and we're supposed to actually know what the laws are so we can actually live our life in accordance with them. Okay, rule of law, really important. We don't just have decisions made by someone in power because that's what they want to do today, right? We have a system and a process. Okay, second, democracy. I'm not going to say too much about this right now because I'm going to come back to it, right? We're going to turn around and come back. But democracy, really, part of the concept comes down to what we talked about a moment ago, the idea of sovereignty. Who has the real power in our political system? When the framers were putting together the Constitution, they knew that they weren't going to be able to set up a king who was just going to get to rule for life and then pass it down to their children, or Harry and Meghan Markle, right? They're currently moving to Canada. Yeah. The idea is, the framers realized, that the only place that real legitimate political power comes from is from the people, right? The consent of the governed is a popular phrase when it comes to democracy. If you want a political system to have a legitimate basis, that's where it comes from. Now, this was actually a love-hate thing for the framers, because as much as they knew that they needed to depend upon the consent of the governed, they also had a certain amount of fear about the average American, even back in 1789, and exactly what they were capable. I'm not capable of speaking, apparently. What they were capable of actually doing. So, I mean, Electoral College, we've all heard of the Electoral College. Love it or hate it, right? Well, the Electoral College exists because the framers just weren't quite sure that the average American should be allowed to choose who the president was. Maybe we need people who are going to think about it a little bit more. Yeah? So democracy, and then, okay, representation. So democracy almost inevitably leads us into a conversation about voting. Here's a question. When I go to the polling place and I choose someone to be my representative in Congress, is that thing I'm doing there part of democracy necessarily? I should have probably started this before I advanced the point on the screen, because what I want to say is, no, it's not. This is interesting. If you go back to ancient Greece and how, that's where we usually trace democracy back to. The ancient Greeks didn't have this idea that you could choose someone to go and do the ruling for you. If you wanted to be involved, you actually had to do it yourself. It was a direct democracy as opposed to an indirect one. Well, here's the thing. If you're going to have a new country which spans, I don't know what, thousands and thousands of miles, and has, even in the 1780s and 90s, millions of people, how do you make what was then the understanding of democracy work? If everybody is supposed to somehow be involved in the decision-making process, in talking and voting, you can't. So the framers didn't invent this, but I mean, around the time of the Constitution, scholars, philosophers were looking at the idea of representation and saying, you know what, if we take democracy and if we bolt on this idea of representation, we can actually make democratic principles go farther than they would before. I mean, before, democracy could only go so far. You could only rule a city-state of a certain size, population-wise or physical space-wise. But representation made it possible to go farther. Do you want to know who invented representation? Take a wild guess. We get democracy from the ancient Greeks. Where does representation come from? The idea that you would designate someone to go and do stuff for you. Name a place in the world and history. Rome. Thanks for playing. You got a piece of candy bar, so. India. Interesting guess, but no, not really. France? No, they came up with some stuff, but not representation. What if I give you a clue, a hint, as my kids would say? They had pointy horns on their hats. Vikings. I mean, maybe not specifically any group of Vikings, but the concept of representation actually comes out of Northern Europe, Scandinavian countries, going down into the groups that were actually sort of in the region of the United Kingdom around that time. And it didn't start with any connection at all to democracy. It wasn't about, hey, we all get to choose somebody. It started off connected to aristocracy and nobility. The idea of sending as a king a representative to go off to a council of other kings, right? So a word that you use every day, thing. You know this word, this thing? Actually traces back to an older word going back into that area. Take the H out, ting. A ting was actually the term for a kind of assembly of representatives that would come together, often in fields with specific kinds of like stones marking the place. And actually, Iceland was the location of the first kind of gathering of all representatives as representatives at another level. They had something called the Althing, which was kind of, I guess, in a way, kind of, an early kind of parliament. So, but we have representation. But political science professor speaking now. Okay. One of the things I hate, people wasting time arguing about whether we are a democracy or a republic. It's not a profitable conversation because we're both. If by republic you mean something involving representation. We've got democratic principles because we weren't going to give power to a king, but at the same time, representation is very important because otherwise we wouldn't be able to have a political system in our country that actually worked the way we wanted it to. We are a democracy and we are a republic together. Bada bing, bada boom, okay? So those three are very important because they make our political system work. Okay, the last two I want to show, and they sort of represent, controversial isn't the right word, but they represent areas where American political thought has been developing, in particular, over the course of our history. So the first is minority rights. But Professor Roberts, you mentioned individual rights 2 slides ago. Why do you have minority rights here? Great question. Why do you think I separate out individual and minority rights? What's the difference between them? Okay, think about somebody you like. Maybe a member of your family, a significant other, right? Someone you are fond of. You'd be perfectly happy letting them have the right to free speech, right? The right to vote. Depending upon who they are in your family, maybe not. All the other rights that we recognize in our system. Now picture somebody you dislike. Dare I use the word that I try not to let my children use? Somebody you hate, right? Someone whose political opinions are diametrically opposed, not even diametrically opposed, they're like on the opposite side of the universe from you, right? Is it as easy to feel the willingness to give them the right to free speech, the right to vote, the right to marry whomever they want, the right to own whatever weapon they want? The difference between individual and minority rights is that individual rights we recognize as a concept that our political system should give us these kinds of protections. But the difference between that and minority rights is oftentimes we're not willing to extend those rights to people who are fundamentally different from us. But as a political system, and clearly you can see we didn't do this great at the start, but maybe we're getting better at it, we have built into the system the idea that we should still extend those rights to people who we disagree with, and even go so far as to build a political system that protects those rights, even if we disagree with them. Right? And that's inherently tied then into the concept of equality. I mean, we could talk forever about equality as well. Equality is clearly a place where there has been change from 1789 to now, but still, there's still even a lot of disagreement about what equality means. Whether equality as a concept really should be about the equality of opportunity or the equality of outcome, for example. Okay, 10 principles. You can see them kind of living through and inspiring things like the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and all the documents and things that we've built after that. What's the most famous line from the Declaration of Independence? You probably you could say it even if you couldn't say anything else about it. That's interesting. We the people is not actually part of the Declaration of Independence. It's actually the preamble of the Constitution. But you're right, that's probably like, the next most recognized thing. That they are endowed with certain unalienable rights, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. But among these are, and if you read it in the original when they sort of had weird typography, among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Because S's were literally F's. Okay, so you see that in those fundamental concepts, those fundamental documents. Okay, let's stop and think about these 10 principles, though, for a moment. It should be pretty clear that even though these are principles that most Americans would claim to hold quite dearly, these are all moving parts. These are not static concepts. I mean, the separation of powers and checks and balances are in the news almost daily, whether it's regarding the specific issue of President Trump's impeachment in Congress, or whether it's more generically about the question of how much power should the president have to get our troops into foreign wars without Congress declaring formal war. Federalism. One of the most important things to know about federalism is that right around the time of the New Deal, we almost entirely switched our understanding of what federalism meant. Before that, the federal government and state governments kind of lived in separate zones. They didn't have anything to do with each other. Since then, they both have their hands in almost everything to do with American government, and that means things get kind of complicated when you try to figure out who's responsible for what. Rights, rights have changed over time. I'm not sure most people would necessarily agree with that language about being endowed by their creator with unalienable rights. And equality, equality, we're still working on understanding what equality really means and how to be faithful to that concept. So they're all moving parts. This is a system in motion. Beyond that, these are also concepts that are frequently in conflict with each other. So federalism and individual rights were still kind of our intention. When the Bill of Rights was written, it only applied to the federal government. So if you wanted to actually have a right to free speech, the federal government couldn't stop you, but a lot of states could. If they did not have a specific provision in their constitution, state constitution, giving you the right to free speech, the states could do whatever they wanted to you. Weird. Over the course of the 20th century, the Supreme Court decided a number of cases that said, you know what, if rights are going to really be rights, every level of government has to follow them. Otherwise, we just end up with things that are nonsensical, right? And then, I mean, minority rights and democracy are in tension. I mean, left to its own devices, the concept of democracy really is the majority gets whatever it wants, right? But if the majority wants to trample on minority rights, well, in our system we say that's a place you can't go. And then the majority tries as much as possible to do it and tiptoe around the margins. But so they're in tension. And then, I mean, individual rights, equality, and minority rights. I mean, the tension, the complicated relationship there. I mean, a case that I talk about in my Political Science 206 class, decided a couple years ago, the masterpiece cake bakery case from Colorado. Anybody familiar with this? This was 2015, 16, 17. What was involved in this case? What was the issue at stake?
A gay couple went to a cake shop, a specific cake shop,
Mhm.
and they wanted to make them a wedding cake, I think, but the shop refused. They were like, "All right, to refuse."
And why did they refuse?
Because they don't believe in gay marriage.
Okay, right. Right to gay marriage. The bake shop made it about free expression, not so much about religion, which could be another way to do it, but about the right to free speech, right? If I am making a cake for you, my artistic expression is going into that cake. You can't force me to say something I don't believe, right? In this case, the baker said, no, they could have bought any off-the-shelf cake that they wanted, a plain, undecorated cake, and I would have been fine with it. But you want me to say something I don't believe, right? They tried to make this about artistic expression. The argument didn't go very far, but think about it. I mean, anything related to art in any kind of way. I mean, the messages that you put into your art are your expression. Where does your right to say what you want run into somebody else's right? Okay. Conflict. Okay, so 10 principles. The one I want to talk about most is democracy, because, hey, this is democracy 101, right? And I think there's also an argument to be made that democracy is the most interesting, maybe the most important of the 10. Yeah, so let's talk about democracy a little bit more. If I asked you to define democracy, my guess is if I gave you enough time, you'd probably come up with something like this, right? Rule by the people. That's democracy. I actually had students go out once and sort of, video people out in the hallway outside the classroom and say, so what's democracy? And this is usually what we come down to in some form, rule by the people. What is the problem with this as a definition of democracy? Let's put our collective college brains together here. Why is this not a good definition? Okay. Okay, so part of the problem there is it might be too reductionistic. It might not actually match what we recognize as how democracies actually function. But you know what? I mean, definitions are sometimes off of reality, right? So I mean, that could be part of it. What else? Let's take this in a different direction. I said we were going to use metaphors of cars a number of times tonight. I don't know why. We just are. It's going to work. If I tried to define a car as a thing that moves, what's the problem with that definition? It's very vague. A lot of things can move, right? That's the problem with this definition of democracy. It's just way too vague. So, first place it's vague. What does ruling mean? What is ruling? I mean, we just talked about the fact that Montesquieu said there are 3 governmental powers: writing laws, executing laws, and judging the laws. Are we talking about all of those? I mean, are some of them involved? I mean, are we saying that, regular people should be judges in court cases? I mean, what are we saying? What is rule? Even the shortest word is vague. By. So, I mean, we talked just now about representatives. I mean, it's something we recognize as part of our system. But even beyond that, if our system of government is a car, What does it take to satisfy it being a democracy? Do you have to have your hands on the steering wheel? Is that what by means? You need to be the one in charge of making it go where it goes? Or does it satisfy it to just sit in the back seat and give people directions, right? Take me to the airport. What does it mean if you're sitting in the driver's seat but you're relying upon Siri for directions? I don't know. Or what if you're in your Tesla and the Tesla is driving by itself? I don't know. We have to contemplate this metaphor at some point. But what is by? And then people. People is vague. So when the Declaration of Independence was written, that lofty language, all men are created equal, right? So just the facial language there, right? We're leaving off a little more than half the population, right? It's interesting, the gender imbalance in this room. So what's your name over there, sir? Nate. We'd be the only people with political power back in 1789. And that's still presuming a couple of things. Now, of course, there was a racial component. Both of us are Caucasian in some way, so we'd be fine. But do you own your own home? Okay, so we would both, as property-owning males, be allowed to be involved in politics. But the people, and even, right? We can even quibble about, are we talking about citizens, right? To what extent is the government supposed to work positively on behalf of people who are not citizens? There are many places around this country right now where one of the ways to combat illegal immigration is to say things like, if your child is not a citizen, they don't go to school. Or they can't get treatment at the emergency room, right? Rule by the people just doesn't get us anywhere because it's too vague. We need something more specific because I'm a professor and we like putting really fine points on things. We need better definitions for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of governments claim to be democracies. Even back 15 years ago, Saddam Hussein in Iraq claimed that Iraq was a democracy when he was the president essentially in perpetuity. There was voting. People went to vote. They had turnout, record turnout, close to 100%. Do you know why? If you didn't vote, you might not show up at work the next day. At least in one election year, Hussein's campaign commandeered the country's phone system to send out campaign messages to everybody in the country with a phone. And free, fair, and open elections, not quite. Election monitors would check to see who you were voting for and whether you made the right choice. Guess what? A lot of people voted for Saddam Hussein. Is that what we would recognize as a democracy? I don't know. It kind of means rule by the people, right? I think we need a better definition so that we can actually do things like distinguish between things that seem a little bit more in the spirit of democracy. And, having clearer definitions allows us to do things like assess where we're at and figure out what we need to be doing to improve our system. Okay. Can anybody recognize this plant? Okay. Do you like Mexican food? It is cilantro! Congratulations. I do not have a bouquet of cilantro to give you. They don't have those in the vending machine here. Okay, so even if you didn't know it was cilantro, how many of you have heard of cilantro? If you've eaten at Qdoba or Chipotle, maybe even Taco Bell, you've probably had cilantro in something. How many of you know you don't like cilantro? There's actually a minority of the population that have a genetic variant where cilantro tastes like soap. Most people don't like soap on their food, so some people avoid cilantro very strenuously. Okay, why do I talk about cilantro? Cilantro is defined, love and hate, by its flavor. And I'm going to suggest that if we want to try and understand democracy better, one of the ways we can do that is think about flavor. We can think about what democracy tastes like so that we can know whether cilantro's in there or not, right? What is the democratic cilantro in this analogy? The very first time I made Kool-Aid, how many people have made Kool-Aid before? Okay. Apparently, I was just an ignorant person. College, made Kool-Aid, give a glass to my girlfriend at the time, and she makes this face, like, you did something wrong. I'm like, something wrong? You take the Kool-Aid, you add water. She said, where's the sugar? Oh, see, growing up, we always got the pre-mixed stuff where all you had to do is spoon it out of the canister. But you know what, those tiny little envelopes, because they are small envelopes, right? You can't fit 1 cup of sugar in there. So I didn't think about it. I just made Kool-Aid the way I thought I had to. There was no sugar and she knew it, right? Okay, so what is the equivalent for democracy? I'm gonna give you 4 models, I call them, 4 models of democracy. And these all try to take rule by the people, then explain in a more specific way what that means. These are models that have been developed by political scientists and philosophers, and I'm going to say right up front, these are academic philosophical abstractions, okay? I'm going to lay them each out as they sort of are written about. Keep any Snickers about them to yourself until I say it's time for Snickers. No pun on the candy bar intended. It just happens to have worked out that way, okay? Okay, so 2 of the models of democracy I'm going to talk about are what we call procedural models, which means that they suggest there is a particular way of doing democracy. It's about a process. And if you do that process the right way, if you have the right rules, the right processes, the right institutions and procedures, and they work well, congratulations, you've got a healthy democracy, okay? The other set of models are what we'll call substantive. And they argue that process might have a role to play, but there is some substance, there is something recognizable about democracy that needs to be there, and when it's not, you got a problem. So, procedural and substantive, 2 of each. Let's start with the procedural ones. So, majoritarian democracy is the name usually given to the first. And this is going to sound really familiar. Okay, so pizza back there. We had a bunch of cheese, we had some pepperoni, and I didn't look at the boxes in the back. How was the decision made to have those particular flavors of pizza? The most popular, okay. If you were to have a party at your home tonight, tomorrow, and you were to do something like order pizza, how would you figure out which ones to order? It's so obvious no one can think of to say it. Ask, okay. Ask who? The people who are going to be there, right? And when are you going to ask them? And then what are you going to do once you have that information? Get the most popular, right? It might not look like it. You might not have pulled out ballots, but you voted, right? And in general, the majority is probably going to be the one that comes out. If most people want cheese, then we're going to have cheese, especially if there's limited pizzas that you're going to purchase, right? I mean, if you're going to buy 15 pizzas, you can order everything, right? But if you're just going to have 1 or 2 pizzas, you have to make a strategic decision about what the right choices are. Well, majoritarian democracy is built on those concepts, and it sounds familiar because this is what most people think about when they think about democracy. You ask them to explain rule by the people, they're going to say, well, we have elections. If you press them a little bit, they'll say, hopefully they are free, fair, and open elections. Those 3 adjectives usually get thrown around. The idea is free, meaning that people have the right to make whatever vote choice they actually want to, that it's not, someone looking over their shoulder to make them choose the correct choice. Fair, meaning, no one's stuffing the ballot box, right? I mean, there's a real count, and that reflects the real number of votes. And then open, meaning anybody can actually run in the election that wants to. If you had a free election and a fair election, but at the same time the government controlled who got to run for office, would that fit your understanding of democracy? Everybody shake your head no, please. I want to make sure that you're all on the same page with me. I mean, if you're hidden totalitarians in this room, I want to know so I can run before the pitchforks come out or something. But so no, I mean, we wouldn't, because that's part of what we understand the democratic elective process to be about. Okay. Once you have that, and you have that system of elections, it allows a majority to express a preference, and then that turns into, in our system, usually choosing someone to go off and then vote in Congress and that kind of thing. The theory here is that if you have that kind of electoral system, government institutions can be accountable to the public, meaning if they make a decision that you don't like, What do you do at the next time they're up for re-election? You don't vote for them, right? Keep them out of office. Members of the Federal House of Representatives. How long are their terms of office? 2 years. Members of the Senate serve 6 years. Why do you think the difference? The framers described the House of Representatives as the people's house. It's supposed to have a closer connection to the public, which means if they messed up, you'd be able to get them out of office a lot faster. And that's one of the arguments being made against President Trump's impeachment right now is, why are we doing this? Let's just wait to have him not be reelected in November. Okay, so under this theory, if you've got the right process and it works, even though I'm just sitting at home in my living room, I can still, as a citizen of this country, effectively have a part in ruling the country by way of the indirect connection to my elected representatives. And I can have some measure of control over where this country goes. Okay. One of the things I want to point out here is that these are models, and therefore we can also then use them as a way to diagnose, is democracy healthy or not? Under this model, for democracy to be healthy, you got to have some things. You got to have citizens who are educated about what they're going to do, about who the options are, who they're going to vote for. They need to know some basic information like, when the election is, right? They need to be motivated to get there, and they need to be willing to participate. What are some of the weaknesses of this model? Where does it fall down? Okay, it could. I mean, you can still have a system like this that protects minority rights. It's not necessarily given that it doesn't, although certainly without a respect for minority rights, this wouldn't be a very nice political system to live in. Any fans of Jimmy Kimmel? Watch his late night show? Or long ago, Jay Leno was on TV. One of the most popular kind of segments to do on a late night talk program is to take a camera and a microphone, to go down onto a city street and ask people knowledge questions. Why? Because a lot of people are uninformed, right? And sometimes dramatically so. But that's not even the best part. Not only are human beings uninformed as a general rule, but they're willing to lie about their level of knowledge when they fear that they're going to be seen as unknowledgeable, right? So, if you're going to ask someone a question like, who is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, right? No one's going to answer, right? That's fine. And they don't know it. But the better one is where you make up something, right? So do you agree with President Trump's invasion of Mars? And do you think it was a justified use of, oh yeah, definitely, right? That's how I have the Space Force. Yeah. The problem with the majoritarian model of democracy is it expects something that just doesn't exist. Not only do people not know as much as we think they should, but they're not involved. So Iraq under Saddam Hussein, almost 100% voter turnout. What's average voter turnout in this country in a presidential election year? Low. Let's put some numbers on that. Low. Someone guess a number. 30. Yeah, kind of in that ballpark. And that's not like, percentage of everybody, like, children. That's percentage of the voting eligible population. Woo, democracy, we're strong and healthy because we don't care and don't know anything. For a long time, this is kind of the presumption that political scientists used when thinking about what democracy was. In the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, they started looking at, hey, let's not just presume things, let's look at what the American public is like. And guess what? Even 100 years ago, people were still not knowledgeable, and not involved. It's not a new problem, so you can at least rest assured of that. So what do you do, though? 1920s, going into the 50s, we are the shining light on the hill. We are still not super prominent among the world in terms of nations, but we're the bastion of hope and democracy and the American dream. But what do you do when you suddenly realize it might all be a sham, that maybe a democracy is not as healthy as it actually should be? Give up, choose communism, go your own way. Well, political scientists actually sort of did a bait and switch. And what they did was they said, you know what? Okay, the average citizen is not knowledgeable, isn't not voting. Let's actually find a way to believe that's a good thing. If the average citizen isn't taking time to learn about politics and is choosing not to vote, maybe that's a good thing because they think everything is A-okay, right? That's the positive interpretation of apathy, right? Apathy can mean a lot of things, but if you presume that it's just okay because no one is agitating about it, you're great. Political scientists then said, well, let's look around and see what else we have, and what we have, especially as that period of time wore on, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, what we see is the rise of mass protest movements, whether it's civil rights or reaction to the Vietnam War or whatever. And you see the idea that there are people who, unlike the average citizen, are motivated, are usually informed, are concerned. Political scientists said, let's try to rewrite our understanding of democracy and say maybe it's not just about elections. Maybe to have a healthy democracy, what we need is a system that says, is anybody upset? Is anybody concerned? Does anybody need a change? And if there are such groups, which there were, allows their voice to make its way into the political system. Under that understanding then, elections and all that, that's great. Let's not get rid of that. But you need something else. A healthy democracy then would be a system that makes it possible for concerned citizens to make their voice heard and to do so in as many ways as possible. And guess what? We end up being a healthy democracy because some of the basic features we just talked about make it easy for organized groups to make their voice heard. Separation of powers means there's not just one king you have to go lobby. We got 3 branches of government that you can actually take advantage of. And I mean, actually during the beginning of the civil rights era, I mean, a lot of the most prominent decisions actually came not by getting Congress to pass a law because they were mired in north-south antagonism, but they came through the courts because the courts existed as an avenue to pursue justice that was not being provided by the other branches. And then federalism also helps here too. If the stoplight down the street from me wasn't working, it would be really burdensome if I had to drive to Washington and talk to someone in Washington about fixing my traffic light, right? I'd be, take a number 3,732, right? I mean, but a federal system means that there is a government closer to me where I can make my voice heard, right? And it's not even just the state government. I don't have to go to Lansing. I can just call it the Kent County Road Commission. Yeah? So by that understanding, we have a pretty maybe healthy system. Okay. Those are the 2 procedural models, right? Because they're both about process. Do you have the system set up the way it needs to be to make it work well? So let's talk about the 2 substantive models. So the first one, I could talk about this, and I have a feeling other people in other Democracy 101 sessions have talked about some of these ideas. But it's a concept that is often called participatory democracy. And if pluralist democracy, and by the way, it's called pluralist democracy because the idea is the system, our political system is healthy if there are multiple groups, hopefully, who are concerned and trying to take action. And in a perfect world, groups that are opposed to each other, right? So if both sides of an issue can actually work to express their opinions. The participatory, and by the way, I will stumble over the phrase participatory democracy at least 5 times because it's the hardest to say really quickly. But participatory democracy starts by saying, you know what? If we're trying to understand what the flavor of democracy is, the cilantro of democracy, as it were, you know what? Focusing on process just doesn't cut it. You can set up the right process and still have things come out of a system like that that just don't feel like what we're expecting, feel like what democracy should be. Participatory Democrats say, well, if we're going to find out what that kind of flavor is, we don't really need to look any farther than the concept that was there in democracy from the beginning, really, back in ancient Greece, this idea of being directly involved. Now, they don't necessarily mean then that the idea is to go and take charge of Congress and everybody vote. It's not the idea that because we have, let's see, where's my cell phone? There. It's in a different pocket than I normally put it. Okay. Not because we have some digital device that we can now all vote and we don't need Congress. That's not it. But participatory democracy actually argues that for a system to be characterized as a healthy democracy, we need to see people who are willing to be engaged beyond the base level expectations, right? In a way, voting once every 4 years is kind of like, that's the least you can do without being, I guess, dead or something, right? That's where you should be at. From there, everything is a step up and shows that, in a sense, there has been blood shed to bring us this country and the freedoms that we have. You can install all sorts of patriotic music and stuff in the background here, right? The idea is we don't just have the right to vote, we should take advantage of this freedom, this opportunity, but beyond that, we should do more. And so they emphasize in part all the ways that you can be involved in politics that most people never are. So you can be involved, you can serve on a representative body, whether it's a school board or whether it's a township board or all the way up to state legislatures. You can actually run for office. Has anyone here run for office before? I ran for president in 2016. We could talk about this some other time. Someone Google it. Okay. So you can also, if you're not going to run for office, you can actually support a campaign. You can help out, contribute financially, or contribute your time and your effort knocking on doors. I did that for a guy I knew once. Realized I really hate knocking on doors and handing out flyers. Not for me. Beyond that, helping with voter registration drives, right? Something you can do right here at Grand Valley. And beyond that, boycotts, demonstrations are a kind of political involvement that gets you engaged in the system beyond just the mere basics. And then, there are also opportunities for democratic involvement in workplaces, whether it's being part of unions and labor organizations. Okay, those are all things that you are free right now to do. There is nothing in the Bill of Rights that says that because it's just something you can. Because we have free, fair, and open elections, you can run for office. Although the rules are burdensome and might actually be worth talking about whether they get in the way of that actually working out well, but save that for later. Okay. Participatory Democrats, though, also say, you know what, we can do more. We can work to build a system that actually makes it possible to get people more democratically involved. And here's where things start getting a little weird and where people who aren't prone to these ideas starts raising their eyebrows. So, for example, we have low voting. A lot of people have talked about ways to actually increase voter turnout in this country. Things like make Election Day a holiday, right? So that people who might normally be working probably wouldn't be. Or put it on a weekend when many people might not be working anyway. Yeah. Well, that's not enough for participatory Democrats. What about compulsory voting? Right now we have a system where you can exercise the right to vote or not. What about a system where if you didn't vote, you got penalized? There are countries in the world that do this. Some it's a monetary fine. Some countries use shaming, right? Imagine the White House had a page that shows the names of everybody in the country who didn't vote, right? Or who needs that now, right? Maybe we just get notifications like we do for Amber Alerts, right? Jane didn't vote. Everybody exert peer pressure on her to make sure she does next time, right? Compulsory voting. Why? Because it's good to be involved, even if you have to be a little draconian. Increasing voluntary or maybe even making community service mandatory in a way. In Israel, now this is where I have to make sure I don't speak out of turn. In Israel, essentially everyone serves a year in the military. It's not like a draft because they're fighting a war. It's because it's an expectation. If this country has given you shelter, if this country has given you a place where you can pursue the American dream, and you don't do anything to give back, well, shame on you. And this isn't necessarily a bad idea. Think about all the problems that exist in this country that no one has a chance to tackle just because there isn't enough money or manpower, person power, right? Now imagine if, not everybody goes into the military after they graduate from high school, but everybody goes in some sort of, why am I blanking on a name? AmeriCorps kind of thing, right? Imagine all the disadvantaged children in states who could learn to read if we actually just sent people there to help them, right? Think of all the things that we could get done in this country if we actually just made sure people were participating beyond sitting on their butts. Okay, other ideas. So everybody knows about jury duty, right? As a citizen, you're probably at some point in life going to get called for jury duty. See, that's what they say. I still have never been called, and I'm waiting to be because, usually like you get a free get out of jail free card by being a political science professor because no attorney is going to put you on a jury. But I haven't had the opportunity. But a jury duty is an example of a process called sortition. Okay? Sortition is the idea of putting people into an office, but not doing it by an election, right? We don't vote on who's going to be the best juror, right? No, I promise I'm going to hang them all, right? Or everybody gets off free, right? We don't. You're just chosen. We could do the same thing for a lot of other positions. Some positions in ancient Athens were actually done this way. There are all sorts of jobs or positions in this country that we have elections for where it doesn't make a ton of sense. And I've gotten in trouble for this. So does anybody know what a drain commissioner does? Great, no. But in Michigan, we elect them. Okay, I'm just going to presume. I actually had one time in a class where I started on this rant, and someone was like, well, actually, I know the drain commissioner, and here's why it's important. But a drain commissioner, in theory, has something to do with drains. Is there a Republican way to make sure drains work? Is there a Democratic way to make sure drains work? I don't think so. But at the same time, we have people run for office. Now, they don't spend millions in advertising, but they spend some. You will see advertising. There will be people putting flyers in your door. And guess what? There's an actual cost to an election. Our country pays money for the privilege of running elections. And the more things we elect, the more money we have to spend for it. Why? Ballots have to be printed, all that kind of stuff. What if we just took the 2 people in the entire county who wanted to be drain commissioner and let them serve like alternating terms for 3 years or something? Would that be a substantially worse system than now? And then participatory Democrats also say, let's add more representative bodies. Let's have local community councils where problems that are of importance to the community can be talked about and solved, and you can actually then try to get Florence to understand why those pink flamingos on her lawn are just so annoying, right? And hopefully you get them taken down. Okay. Participatory democracy. The flavor of democracy is involvement. Voting in an election, yeah, it's kind of like voting. That's the equivalent of the dried cilantro. The true story, the dried cilantro that I have in a bag in the cabinet where I never go, that was given to me by my mother-in-law 18 years ago. Does it taste like cilantro? Maybe, but not very much. Okay, you might be fine with it. You wouldn't notice it. Okay, but if you don't taste participation, by that logic, you don't have a healthy democracy. That's one model. Okay, so I want to bring us to the last one then. And you know what? I can do this because this is a small room, a small group. I'm not going to ask for volunteers. You are all magically volunteers, okay? So everybody on your feet. And we have this kind of empty space between these tables here. Everybody sort of come and station yourself somewhere vaguely in this area. Okay, so this last model of democracy starts off not so much by looking at one of the previous models and saying, oh, here's the problem and here's how we fix it. Instead, it says, you know what? Let's just stop and think about what the modern world is like. What is the modern condition, 21st century America like? And there's a couple of things that you discover when you start thinking about it. One is, over the course of the last 200 years, we have lost a lot of the things that would normally bring groups of people together, right? So it used to be that we all followed a king. What the king said, we did. We don't have that anymore. Everybody take one step back or away from other people. It used to be that, and maybe this is not a good one to rely upon, it used to be that charismatic leadership would motivate people, right? We'd follow that person who was just able to convince us with rhetoric and who was able to, whip up support. You could argue that's still alive and well in American politics today, unfortunately. But the fact is we don't recognize that as a legitimate basis for doing things, right? Even, when we're following the person that we love and adore, we're still, a little uncertain. Take a step back away from each other. Beyond that, as a public, we don't necessarily share one common religion or one common ethical history. Take a step back in a way. We don't have, even thinking about now, it used to be that we could argue that there was some sort of American tradition and history that would bring us together, right? We all lived through Pearl Harbor. We all lived through the Nixon impeachment. It used to be that I could safely say we all lived through 9/11. How many of you were born after 9/11? 4 days, okay. We don't even have shared history in the same way. Take a step back, okay? What I've been physically doing, right, is it's more and more possible for us as a public to disperse. The bonds that bring us together are just not there in the same way that they used to be. And that's a problem because, our political system, it's kind of important because what we've figured out is just because we love individualism, it doesn't mean that that is the sole solution to all of our problems. In the American Creed documentary, Juno Diaz, the author, said this: we're addicted to individuality, but most of the forces that act against us, the cruelties we experience, require collective action to correct or combat them. A term that's often used to describe some of these are wicked problems. Ever heard that term, wicked problems? They are problems that are just not easy to fix, right? What's an example of a wicked problem that faces us in this world today? Toss one out. Climate change. Can I fix the climate? No. Can you fix the climate? Can we all in this room working together fix the climate? Okay, everybody take 3 steps back together. Yes, I reversed it. Back together, okay? So climate change, what's another problem? Maybe something about the American dream. Poverty. How do we fix poverty? I don't know, because if we could figure it out easily, we'd have done it already, right? And it's not a problem that any one person can solve, and it seems very hard for the political system to do it. 3 steps closer together, people. Okay, what else? What's another problem? What happened 4 days before you were born? 9/11. Regardless of what you make of it, since then we have been fighting a war on terror. Are we any closer to solving and ending the war on terror? Are we at peace with terror? Do we even have an idea how to do that? Have things got worse since then, perhaps? Yes. Yeah. 3 steps closer together. Okay, what else? What other kinds of problems? Now you're not going to start thinking of them because you don't want to get it closer together. But what are some other problems? Drugs. You know what? When I was teaching early in my career, 17 years ago, I would talk about the meth academic. There aren't meth academics yet, to my knowledge. Well, actually, no. Walter White was a meth academic. There we go. Okay, we solved that. We solved the meth academic, but not the meth epidemic, right? I would talk about, guess what? If you have seasonal allergies, life has become more complicated for you. You need to get your Your allergy meds from behind the counter. Why? Because people are buying them and cooking up meth with them and blowing up houses, and we don't like that kind of thing. But you know what? Since then, we've got the rise of the opiate epidemic. Like I said, I can't talk today, right? 2-3 steps together. Now we're doing things like suggesting that libraries should carry, what is it? It's not methadone. What is the shot? Narcan. Like libraries, and people should be carrying Narcan so that if there's an accidental overdose, we're ready to fight it, right? Other problems, what do we have? Gun violence. How do we solve the fact that some people think that we need to have our guns to make sure the government doesn't turn on us and you're not going to take it from our cold, dead hands, at the same time that we have people who are holding the cold, dead hands of their loved ones who were shot by guns? Any solutions? Nope. 2 steps together, please. I won't press you for any more. Okay, but think about this. Where are we in modern history? We are at a point where we are flung apart. We have less basis on which to work together, but the need to work together is all the more pressing than it ever has been. Guess what? That sucks. Okay, you can take a seat. So what do we do about it? What do we do? If we can't agree to work with each other because we went to the same church or because, we both saw the Twin Towers come down, what do we do? The fourth model is called deliberative democracy. And deliberative democracy says what's left at this point in our history is the fact that we are all human beings and we are capable of using our emotions and our intellect to engage with each other whether we want to or not. And that might be the only thing we have left, is the ability to see each other as equals, as worthy of being engaged with, if only for the reason that we are in this enterprise altogether. And that if we don't find something better to politically or actually physically punching each other in the face all the time, that's what we're going to be left with. Now, deliberation is a very particular term. Deliberation is like talking, but it's kind of bigger. It's more important. It's, in a sense, a process of discourse that tries to make sure the playing field is fair for everyone, that there's equality between participants, that everybody has the ability to bring up something as part of the public discourse, that no one is shut out from it, that everyone can question even the topics that we're talking about. What is it that should we be talking about? If you become a political science major, hopefully at some point in an upper division class, you encounter an article called The Two Faces of Power by Bachrach and Baratz. And they argue that power comes in 2 flavors, okay? There is the power to make something happen, right? The person who encounters you in a dark alley and says, your money or your life, has a power over you, right? They can get you to do things. At the same time, TV can get you to do things by suggesting you really want to buy this thing, and then you go to Amazon and you do it, right? But in that article, they suggest there's another face of power that we never talk about. The power to simply keep things from becoming part of the conversation. Guess what? We're not going to solve poverty if people in power, I'm not saying they are, I'm just making a general statement, but we're not going to solve the problem of poverty if the people who are in power don't think it's worth talking about or don't want it to be talked about, right? People with power can stop conversations from happening. That's a very important kind of power to have. In a real deliberative conversation, everyone has the ability to bring things in. Nothing is off the table, even the rules of the conversation itself. Okay, so deliberation. And the heart of deliberation is this idea of what's called a criticizable validity claim. When we have a deliberation with each other, we make statements that something is true or false, right or wrong, should or should not, and we provide backing for them. And then other people can take that information, that evidence, and they can weigh it, and they can judge it, and they can ask us questions. They can probe our motives. Who's contributing to your campaign fund, Senator? And then ultimately, hopefully, minds get changed. So in a deliberative system, it's great if you have the right to free speech, right? I mean, free speech is probably in the top 3 of most people's favorite rights, right? And you can encounter people everywhere who clearly love it best of all, right? People on the opinion pages who get up on their metaphorical soapbox. The comments section of any website, right? There's a reason they say don't read the comments. 99% of Twitter, right? There are people who love the right to free speech. From a deliberative point of view, though, free speech is only, I don't even want to say half. I'm not sure it's even half of what's important. Because deliberation is not just a parade of endless people getting up on a box and saying stuff. That's not deliberation. Deliberation requires that other people, boy, wait, where was it? Okay. It's like you knew I was coming. Conversation agreements. It was on here somewhere. Listening is in here somewhere. Try to truly listen without interruption or crosstalk. I don't really care about the interruption or the crosstalk part, but listening, right? For deliberation to function, people don't just have to take advantage of their right to free speech. They have to take part in the responsibility to listen, and to listen to things that they might not enjoy or appreciate or think have a good basis. And if that was not enough, not only do you need to listen, you need to be willing to have your mind changed. In my classes, actually it's been about 2 weeks for this semester, I always do an exercise where I ask my students to debate whether a burrito is a sandwich. And there's a real reason I do this. It actually has to do with understanding the nature of judicial authority and the difference between making a law and being a judge. And it's lots of fun, and people who never talk suddenly are very motivated by the question of whether a burrito is or not a sandwich. And actually, I tried to make it even more interesting this last semester. I forced people to take a side to start with. So I'm like, okay, you are going to take the side that yes, a burrito is a sandwich, which nobody wants, because most people go, burrito's not a sandwich, right? And I always say, pardon me, I always say, at the end I'm going to ask you what your opinion is. And I will have the deepest respect for you if you admit that your mind was changed during this process, that you didn't believe a burrito was a sandwich, but now you have come to see that burritos are sandwiches, right? Along with all sorts of other things. Is a hot dog a sandwich? Is a calzone a sandwich? Is a pizza a sandwich? Ooh, see, now I need to stop because I can always go on and on about this. But deliberation relies upon this. If deliberation is going to power and make democracy happen, we need citizens who are willing to actually admit that they're wrong. That is what the heart of free speech and political debate is about, not just yelling louder than someone else, but being willing to say, hey, guess what? I was wrong. Okay, deliberation happens not just within government, but I mean, one of the main things that government has a responsibility for is making sure then that society as a whole has opportunities for deliberation to happen. And it's not about getting rid of elections either. I mean, most deliberative Democrats say, you know what, if people and the public as a whole are deliberating with each other, that creates legitimacy, which is funneled into the government, kind of like through the transmission belt of elections, right? The engine of the car is the people deliberating, the wheels turning are elected officials getting us somewhere, but it's only because we're deliberating and giving that legitimacy through elections that we get somewhere. Okay, so where to begin with the problems here, right? If we were concerned that citizens didn't know enough about who is running for office and weren't willing to once every 4 years go vote, this is kind of a tall order, isn't it? I mean, let alone yourself and whether you believe you're going to be willing to change your mind. I mean, think about other people you know, the fans of internet debating, right, who will fight for whatever argument, even if it's not important, even if it's about a burrito and a sandwich, right? Okay. That's like 3 weeks of democratic theory shoved into like 40 minutes. That alone would be enough to talk about, though I know you don't want to. So what I want to do is I'm going to circle around and bring it back to the American dream and maybe come up with something at the end. So I I mentioned in passing at the beginning that, I mean, yeah, there's a political side, a political part to the American dream. And, you know, it's not just about socioeconomics, but it's about, I think, in some ways, at the base, a concept of self-determination, right? The ability to not have those restrictions on yourself, whether it's then where you end up socioeconomically, or whether it's then also just in the sense of not having, anybody fans of the show Malcolm in the Middle? I mean, obviously, you probably only have watched it on Netflix or Hulu or something, right? But I was alive when that was on TV. Anybody remember the theme song to that? I'm not going to ask you to sing it. One line repeats over and over again at the end. You're not the boss of me now. You're not the boss of me now. You're not the boss of me now. And you're not so big. But that's, right, I mean, part of what the American dream is. I mean, the idea that we should have as few people telling us what to do as we need. There's that sense of self-determination. That's what that limited government principle is all about, right? Balancing things in a way that favors the individual and individual action. And whatever we come up with for our political system then forms the rules of the game. I mean, that's the game, the framework in which everything else about the American dream happens. So here's the problem. Heraclitus, ancient Greek, is credited as saying the only constant in life is change, right? We talked about how all those principles of American political thought, they're moving parts. Things are in motion. And beyond that, there are all sorts of things between the framing of the Constitution and now, right? Changes, whether they're historical, technological, economic, sociological, that have put pressure on our system and have created tension and problems for our underlying principles that really in a lot of places we've never legitimately talked about or talked through. I mean, for example, this is old news now, but this was kind of like fairly recent when I was first teaching. The Fourth Amendment protects you against unreasonable searches and seizures, which usually means like, you know, the cops have to have a warrant to like break down your door. Well, the question is thermal imaging technology. Can the police put a thermal camera in a helicopter, fly over houses, and look for houses that are uncharacteristically hot because they might have marijuana grow operations inside? And the heat lamps make the house stand out from other houses, right? I mean, less relevant now because, right, that stuff is all legal, but is that something that the Fourth Amendment says can or shouldn't happen? What would the framers have thought, right? They couldn't imagine thermal imaging cameras, let alone helicopters perhaps, but okay. How does political free speech relate to campaign finance? Is the amount of money that you can spend on a campaign part of speech, or is it something else? And can we regulate it or not? We've changed in terms of our beliefs. The Eighth Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. Is capital punishment cruel and unusual? Back in 1789, the answer probably would have been no. It's what you should expect if you do such and such. But now, I mean, there is a big difference in opinion when it comes to capital punishment. Now we're quibbling over what combination of drugs is even appropriate for doing it, if we're going to do it at all. And we've also realized that the world is a much different place than we thought it was. We've learned that individual effort is not the only thing that determines whether you are able to fulfill the American dream or not. There are things, systematic issues that go beyond individuals and even beyond government negative action to make it uncertain whether you will ultimately find what you're looking for. And change also, I mean, our political system was created because the framers were afraid of two things. They built a system that was going to keep us from having a tyrannical king who abused power because he held it in his hands entirely and did whatever he wanted. But at the same time, they gave limited power for democracy through the people overall. Democracy, do you know what the word democracy actually means if you parse it out back to the Greek? Here's a hint, krasi basically goes to ruling. What's the dem part? Dem people, right? It means people, but it's actually a very particular interpretation of people. It's really the mob. Democracy is mob rule. It's about the people as a whole. The framers were worried about that, like we talked about with the Electoral College. So they built a system that kind of ran between those two extremes. The question is, today, we still have the same system, minus a few changes, but is our system set up for a world where, are we really worried about whether we're going to have a king try to take power? Do we feel differently about the American public? Depends on whether you watched Jimmy Kimmel recently or not, I suppose, right? Okay, so I mean, change. We've got all these pressures, and I mean, this is sort of boiling down to what I want to leave you with. These are conversations that we should be having, and I don't think as a country we're good at having them at all. I mean, we're just not talking about these things. I mean, our founding documents are part of that conversation, right? The Declaration of Independence, we hold it up, we point to it. Some people carry around the Constitution in their jacket pocket. I used to carry it in my bag, but the copy I had is starting to fall apart, so I just figured I should toss it rather than have to figure out, where all the pages were if I want it. Plus, this day and age, the Constitution's right here, right? Declaration of Independence, everything is right here. We revere those documents, especially the Declaration of Independence, but that's a complicated relationship. First of all, it's not enforceable. The Declaration of Independence doesn't have any ruling power over us. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is great language that people use in political campaigns, but you can't go to court and say the Declaration of Independence says I should be happy and I'm not happy. The Declaration is also too vague, and the Constitution is, it's both at the same time too vague and too specific, and locks us into thinking about how political change should happen. We've had 27 amendments to the U.S. Constitution, 10 of which we got out of the way pretty early on. That's the Bill of Rights, which were passed shortly after the Constitution was ratified. But we've only had 17 since then. Constitutional amendment news happening recently. The state of Virginia, last week, the state of Virginia last week, their legislature ratified the Equal Rights Amendment, which got started in 1972, but never got enough states to sign on for it to become part of the Constitution. All sorts of questions about that because it was written in such a way that if people didn't sign on by 1982, it was basically null and void, but we don't know if that rule is legal, right? The Supreme Court could say, you can't put a rule like that into an amendment. States have forever to ratify it. We've also had 3 or 5 states who have rescinded their vote for the ERA. So if you're interested in amendments, things might be happening in the next couple of years. We might see this case making its way to the Supreme Court. But thing is, I don't think the framers wanted us to sort of treat those documents as if they were set in stone, right? Jefferson, admittedly it was Jefferson, he might not have had the same views as all the other framers. But Jefferson said, a revolution every 20 years or so might be a good idea to shake things up and make our political system, more responsive, more current, more something. Hopefully we can make it a quiet, bloodless revolution, but okay. The problem is that great conversation that we should be having about all these kinds of things, about trying to figure, and whether it's a deliberative conversation or not, maybe it would be good if it would, but we've got something that's entirely different though, okay? I love metaphors. Remember what a metaphor is? Back to English class. Any English majors or anything? Or what's a metaphor? You didn't think you were going to quiz on English, were you? We cover everything here. Very good. You distinguished it properly from a simile, right? Love is like, right? That's a simile. Love is a metaphor. There's actually been interesting neurological research about metaphors. Metaphors are not just a poetic device. Research has shown that a very common thing we do as part of human beings is we actually think about one area of the life, the universe, and everything by using language from another one. Have you ever wondered why we talk about, when we talk about happiness, when we talk about mood, why we talk about up and down? I'm feeling up. I'm feeling down. Why is that? Why do we use words from a spatial part of our understanding of the universe to describe mood? There's no reason why being happy should have to be up, right? You could spin an argument that says maybe sadness should be up because I'm just going to float away out of the atmosphere and disappear, right? How did we do that? There are some metaphors, some metaphorical language uses which are so burned in that we don't even think about them. We just do them because it's part of not just how we use words, but how we think. Research has shown that when you look at two areas, two different domains of knowledge that are shared a metaphorical link, and when you start talking about one of them, your brain actually lights up in the other part. So even though you're not thinking about that other area, your brain is activating those same areas of your brain when you think about it. Metaphors are so powerful, they control how our brain is wired. Whoa, awesome, okay. And I say that because I think the problem is, instead of having a great ongoing conversation about our political reality, we've gotten something else. We've gotten a really bad understanding of what's going on. Complete this for me if you would. Let's make a metaphor. Politics is. And let's not fill in an adjective. Politics is nice, or politics is icky, or politics is the subject I'm trying to avoid taking, or put in a noun there, right? Make a comparison. Politics is this. That's an unfair thing for me to just ask of you suddenly, but I'll start you off with an example. Politics is like medicine, because medicine is the practice of finding what's wrong with a body and making improvements, and so too politics is the process of determining what's wrong with a body of the public and trying to solve that problem. You know? As a citizen, you're expected to show support for that preference against your opponent. Your choices are limited. Ever thought about that? Why are we just rooting for Michigan or Michigan State, right? You know, what if I don't even like football, or I don't like? Your choices are limited. The whole free, fair, and open election thing is a little questionable in this country because guess what? The Constitution did not include the concept of political parties. And political parties have sprung up as a concept to make things like elections easier, and political parties have a great deal of power over who gets to run and even how elections happen. And your choice is really boiled down to who are you going to support, and those choices are given to you by political elites. And you don't get to play the game. You just sit back in the chair and watch, right? We watch the election results come in. Actual politics is for the professionals. That makes me so sad. And as a result, I mean, we have focused almost entirely upon elections, not even just trying to make you figure out which model of democracy you like best, right? And elections are here, they're not going away, but in a sense, they have become the gravitational center of American politics in a way that is both understandable but also frustrating. I mean, we place so much importance on them. Listen to all the conversations about making sure our upcoming elections are secure, right? Making sure that no one's going to hack into them. We also expect too much out of them. Ever heard the word mandate before? What does it mean when some politician says they have a mandate? Any sophomore humor aside. A mandate means, the people have spoken, they want me to do this. Malarkey. Professionally speaking, there is no such thing as a mandate. And the reason is because elections, as much as they are part of the mechanism of government, as much as they are, they mean nothing. No politician can look at a set of election results and say, the people have spoken. They want me to do this. Do you know why? Because the only thing that comes out of an election is a pile of ballots. And you have no idea why anybody's ballot is in that pile. Did they vote for you because they like you? Or did they dislike your opponent more? Did they like this policy of yours or a different one? Did they accidentally mark the wrong box on the paper? Voting, as much as we rely upon it, communicates almost zero information, which is kind of troubling for the thing that we make our entire democracy rely upon. It also makes us a little conservative about making changes. The state of Maine 2 years ago actually decided to adopt something called ranked choice voting. Yeah, because guess what? The way that we vote normally, which is like choose the most popular person or thing, might be what people think is the most obvious way to vote. It's also, according to a lot of scholars, the least good way to do it. People can rig elections very easily in ways that allow the candidate that no one really wanted to get elected by virtue of the fact that, well, the candidate that I really wanted, they're just not going to make it, right? The presidential primary process is so frustrating because someone who might have been the best person to be president drops out 6 months before the process starts because all the research says they don't have a chance, no one's giving them money, they're not going to vote, and guess what? They never had a chance to actually be part of the process. Ranked choice voting allows you to basically come in and take a group of people and say, who's your first choice, who's your second choice, who's your third choice? When people are allowed to do that, it actually better represents the preferences that people have. And you can actually end up getting situations where a better candidate, according to everybody, gets put into office compared to the person that a plurality is majority, by the way. We use plurality rule in this country, which means as long as your group of people shouting is a bigger group than another group, you're the ones that win.